Graves snatched the file from Carver's hands, glanced at it for 2 seconds and threw it on the dirt. "You've got to be kidding me." He said it loud enough for every man on that tarmac to hear. Then he looked up, looked directly at the 4'9" woman walking off that transport aircraft carrying a rifle case almost as long as her body, and he said the word like it was a verdict. "They sent us a doll." The laughter hit her like a wall. Not nervous laughter, not polite laughter. The kind that had already made a decision. The kind that meant she didn't exist. If you're watching this story and it already has your blood boiling, you're exactly where we want you. Subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay with us until the very end, because what Elena Vance did on that ridge at 3,050 meters in the middle of a sandstorm is something none of those men will ever forget for the rest of their lives. The C-13, hit the tarmac hard, the way military transports always did. No ceremony, no gentleness, just a controlled crash that reminded everyone on board that comfort was never part of the deal. Specialist Elena Vance did not grip the cargo netting when the wheels made contact. She did not flinch. She sat with her hands resting flat on her thighs, her eyes already open, already watching the other operators across the hold begin to shift and check their gear, with the practiced calm of men who had done this 100 times. She had done it 112. She just didn't talk about it. The rear ramp lowered with a mechanical groan, and the desert came in all at once. The heat, the smell of jet fuel mixed with sand and something burnt underneath it. The white sky that wasn't white so much as bleached like color itself had given up trying. FOB Kestrel, forward operating base, sitting on the edge of nothing, surrounded by more nothing, with the canyon country of Devil's Throat beginning its jagged rise approximately 19 kilometers to the southwest. Elena adjusted the strap of her primary case, the hard-sided Pelican that held her disassembled intervention, 42 pounds of precision machinery, and she walked down the ramp without waiting for anyone to move first. That was the first thing they noticed about her. Not her height. Not yet. The first thing was that she moved like she already knew where she was going in a place she had never been. Sergeant First Class Danny Kowalski was the one who laughed first. He was standing at the edge of the tarmac with two other members of SEAL Team Alpha Petty Officer Marcus Webb and the team's demolition specialist, a man everyone called Torch, real name, Harris Boland. And when Elena cleared the bottom of the ramp and they got their first full look at her, Kowalski's mouth opened and the sound that came out wasn't exactly laughing. It was more like a release of disbelief. "No," he said, "no way." Webb crossed his arms. Torch just stared. Elena was 4 feet 9 inches tall. She weighed 119 pounds fully loaded with kit. The Pelican case she was carrying was nearly as long as her torso, and she walked like none of that was a contradiction. "Hey," Kowalski called out. "Hey, sweetheart, you sure you're on the right aircraft? The USO tours land on the east side." She didn't look at him. That made it worse. "I'm talking to you," he said louder this time, taking a step forward. "What's in the case, your makeup?" Elena set the Pelican down. Not because she was tired. She set it down with deliberate care, unlatched the 2 front clips, and opened it just enough for Kowalski to see the disassembled barrel of a Chaytak M200 intervention, a rifle designed to kill targets at distances that were supposed to be impossible. She latched it back, picked it up, and kept walking. Kowalski looked at Webb. Webb looked at Torch. None of them said anything for about 4 seconds. Then Kowalski said, so. Lieutenant Graves was waiting inside the operations building, which was generous language for a prefabricated structure with 2 ceiling fans and a table covered in topographical maps. He was 38 years old, built the way a career SEAL gets built, not through vanity, but through pure operational necessity, every pound of him functional. He had 12 years of direct action missions behind him, 2 Silver Stars, a Purple Heart, and an operational clearance that reached places most people in uniform never heard of. He did not look up when Elena came in. His intelligence officer, a young lieutenant named Carver, who wore his discomfort openly on his face, was the one who spoke first. "Sir, this is Specialist Elena Vance, attached sniper support from—" "I know who she is," Graves said. He said it the way you say something when you mean you already made up your mind about it. He finally looked up from the map. And to his credit, his expression didn't crack. He was a professional. He looked at her the way you look at a piece of equipment that arrived damaged, not with cruelty, but with the cold calculus of a man trying to figure out how badly this was going to cost him. Vance, he said. Sir, she said, you've been told the nature of this operation. Devil's Throat Canyon insertion, sir. Direct action strike against a high-value command node. 48-hour execution window. That's right. He looked back at the map. Your file says you have long-range certifications. It says you've operated in mountainous terrain. It says a lot of things. He let that sit for a moment. What it doesn't say is how you ended up attached to a Tier 1 SEAL unit for a mission that requires operators who can move fast, react fast, and fight their way out of a kill box if things go wrong. I can do all three, sir, in those conditions. He didn't phrase it as a question. He phrased it as a statement of doubt wrapped in professional courtesy. Yes, sir. Graves looked at Carver. Carver looked at the floor. Fine, Graves said. Briefing is at 1800. Get your kit settled and stay out of my team's way until then. Elena picked up the Pelican. Understood, sir. She was almost at the door when Graves spoke again without looking up. Vance, she stopped. Don't get in the way of my men, he said. And if you can't keep pace, you tell me now rather than in the field. I won't slow down for you. The room was quiet. I won't need you to, Saru, she said. She left. Carver waited until the door was fully closed before he exhaled. Sir, her record actually it's unusual. She qualified. I read it, Graves said. Then you saw the Kandahar notation. I read it, Carver. He put his finger on a point in the canyon map. Get me current weather projections for the next 72 hours. I want to know everything the meteorology team has on that Haboob system moving northwest. Carver nodded and left. Graves stood alone with the map and the ceiling fans and the weight of a decision he hadn't made yet. The team's bunk room was a long, low space that smelled like gun oil and dry sweat, the universal scent of men who slept with their boots close. Elena was given a cot at the far end, separated from the others by no physical barrier, only the invisible architecture of their indifference. She unpacked her kit in silence, methodically. Each component of the intervention laid on the cot in the order she would reassemble it on, optics checked, bipod joints tested. She didn't rush any of it, and she didn't perform any of it. She just worked. Kowalski came in partway through and stopped when he saw what she was doing. You actually know how to use that thing, he said. She didn't answer right away. She was examining the bolt mechanism. Yes, she said, because I've seen guys who could barely bench press that rifle try to qualify on it, and I qualified, she said. At what distance? She looked up at him on him. What distance would make you believe me? He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, I don't know, a long one. Then we agree, she said, and looked back at the bolt. Kowalski stood there for another moment, not sure what had just happened to him, then walked to his own cot and started checking his M4 without saying anything else. Webb came in, saw the dynamic, sat down. Torch followed, looked at Elena, looked at Kowalski, and made a face that meant he understood something Kowalski didn't. Nobody spoke for about 10 minutes. Then Torch said, quiet enough that only the near cots could hear it, Kandahar notation. Webb looked at him. What? Her file, Torch said. Carver mentioned a Kandahar notation. You know what that is? No. Me neither, Torch said. He looked at Elena from across the room. She was still working the bolt. But it's the only file notation that requires separate command authorization to access. Nobody said anything to that. The ceiling fan turned. Elena picked up the barrel assembly and checked the rifling against the light. The 1800 briefing was the first time she met all of them in the same room. Team Alpha had 6 operators beyond Graves Kowalski, as lead breacher Webb on communications Torch. For demolitions, a medic named Solace, who was built like a defensive end and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had kept dying men alive through willpower alone, a junior operator named Castillo, who was on only his second rotation, and a senior shooter named Reeves, who had a reputation earned as the best rifle fighter in the platoon. Reeves was the one Elena watched most carefully, not because he was hostile the way Kowalski was hostile, because he wasn't saying anything, and quiet men in rooms like this usually had already made decisions. Graves laid out the plan on a projected topographical overlay of Devil's Throat Canyon. The canyon was approximately 11 kilometers long, running northwest to southeast with walls that averaged 60 to 80 meters in height on the north face and significantly lower on the south. The HVTFOA command node for a regional insurgent network was located in a hardened position at the canyon's narrowest point, approximately 7.4 kilometers in from the eastern approach. The plan was direct. Move in through the eastern mouth, fast, aggressive overwhelm the position before they could consolidate. Get out before the Haboob system, which meteorology projected would hit the canyon floor within 18 to 36 hours, made movement impossible. Elena listened to all of it. She looked at the map. She looked at the elevation markers on the canyon's northern rim. She looked at the projected entry point. She raised her hand. Graves looked at her. Vance. Sir, the northern rim has 3 natural overwatch positions that provide line of sight to the entire eastern approach. If the HVT's security detail has even basic tactical awareness, those positions will be occupied before we enter effective range. That's a possibility we've accounted for, Graves said. With respect, sir, the topography doesn't make it a possibility. It makes it a certainty. Look at the elevation at grid position. She stood and moved to the map, tracing the ridge with her finger. Here, here, and here. These 3 points form an overlapping field of fire that covers every viable approach route within the canyon. If we're moving on foot, we're in a kill box from approximately kilometer 3 onward, with no lateral cover and no vertical escape. The room was quiet. That's what speed is for, Graves said. We moved through that exposure window in under 12 minutes. Sir, if the Haboob arrives earlier than projected, which is possible, the pressure systems in this valley are irregular, we lose our speed advantage and our communication window simultaneously. We'd be blind, slow, and in a box. The meteorology team projects 18 hours minimum before impact. Meteorology teams have been wrong in this terrain before, sir. The silence stretched. Kowalski leaned back in his chair. Is she seriously? I'm talking, Elena said. Flat, clear, not aggressive, but absolutely immovable. Kowalski's mouth closed. Elena kept looking at Graves. Sir, if I could establish an overwatch position on the northern rim at approximately grid Foxtrot 7, I could provide real-time intelligence on enemy position, suppress the high ground threat before the team enters the kill box, and maintain communication relay even during partial communications degradation. The northern rim at Foxtrot 7 is at 3,050 meters, Graves said. Yes, sir. The ascent from our staging point to that elevation in this terrain is a minimum 6-hour climb. We don't have that window. I could reach it in 4 hours, sir. Maybe 3.5. More silence. Reeves, who had not said a single word during the entire briefing, looked at Elena with an expression that was not mockery and not belief. It was something else, something that looked like calculation. You're going to ascend 3,050 meters of technical rock in kit carrying that rifle in 4 hours, Graves said. Alone? Yes, sir. In terrain you've never physically scouted. I have the topographical data, sir, and I've climbed in worse. Graves looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his team. He saw Kowalski's expression. He saw Torch's silence. He saw Webb's skepticism written plainly across his face. He saw Reeves looking at the map. No, Graves said, you stay with the team. You maintain position security during our approach, and you hold our 6 during the strike. That's your role. Elena looked at the map one more time. Sir, the canyon is a kill box. I heard you the first time, Vance. His voice was controlled, but the control itself said everything. We move at 0300. Get some sleep. She looked at him. He looked back at the map. She returned to her seat. She did not argue again. But under the table, her fingers were already tracing elevation lines that existed only in her memory. The ridge she had already decided she was going to climb with or without permission, because the men in this room were going to walk into something that none of them could see yet, and she could already see it perfectly. Sleep did not come easily to most of the team that night. The desert had a particular quality of silence that felt like a hell breath, the absence of natural sound replaced by the distant mechanical rhythm of base generators and the occasional creak of the prefab structures expanding and contracting in the cooling night air. Elena lay still on her cot with her eyes open. She was not thinking about the plan. She was thinking about the 3 overwatch positions on the northern rim. She was thinking about the tire track patterns that the most recent drone imagery that Carver had shown her briefly before the briefing, almost as an afterthought, had revealed on the ridgeline approach road. Not fresh tire tracks, Very fresh tire tracks. Directional, heavy vehicle width, going in, not coming out. She had said nothing about this in the briefing because she was still calculating what it meant. But now in the dark, the calculation was finishing itself, and what it was telling her was not ambush possible. It was telling her something colder and more certain. It was telling her ambush confirmed. Someone had moved vehicles onto the ridge in the last 48 hours, vehicles that had not moved back out, which meant either they were hidden up there waiting or they had broken down up there, and the probability distribution between those two possibilities was not even close. She sat up. She looked at the ceiling. Kowalski was snoring softly 3 cots down. Webb had his arm over his eyes. Torch was lying on his back with his boots still on, which Elena recognized as the sleep posture of a man who trusted nothing, not even the short distance between unconsciousness and readiness. She looked at the intervention case. She thought about what Graves would say if she went to him right now in the dark and told him about the tire tracks. She already knew what he would say. She lay back down. She set an internal alarm for 0200 1 hour before the team moved because there was a decision she was going to have to make in that 1 hour window, and she needed to be rested enough to make it cleanly. Whatever it cost her, whatever came after. She closed her eyes. The desert breathed its silent, threatening breath. And somewhere on the 3,050-meter ridge to the northwest, something waited in the dark with the patience of men who knew exactly where their enemy was going to be. At 1:30, Reeves found her sitting outside on the equipment cases looking northwest. He sat down next to her without asking if that was all right. He put his elbows on his knees and looked in the same direction she was looking. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then Reeves said, "Kandahar." She didn't react. "I asked Carver about the notation," Reeves said. "He told me he couldn't access the full file, but he told me the classification code. I've only seen that classification code on 3 other files in my entire career." He paused. All 3 of those men were alive because of something that shouldn't have been possible. Elena was quiet. "So," Reeves said, "what really happened in Kandahar?" She turned and looked at him. The dark made her expression difficult to read, but there was something there. Not pride, not shame. Something more like the weight of a story she had been carrying for a long time. "A convoy," she said. 6 vehicles. We were hit from a ridgeline at approximately 2,800 meters. The terrain made approach on foot impossible. Everyone who'd trained for that scenario said the only option was to suppress with vehicle-mounted weapons and extract. "But that's not what happened," Reeves said. "No," she said, "that's not what happened." She looked back to the northwest. "The ridge was there," she said. "The shot was possible. It just required someone to climb something that wasn't supposed to be climbable and hit something that wasn't supposed to be hittable." Silence. "How many?" Reeves asked. She didn't answer right away. The generator hummed. The desert breathed. "Enough," she said. Reeves nodded slowly. He looked at the northwestern skyline where the first suggestion of the canyon country was a darkness against darkness that felt rather than seen. "The tire tracks in that last drone pass," he said. She looked at him sharply. "I noticed them too," he said. "I didn't say anything in the briefing because Graves had already made his decision, and changing it at that point would have required evidence he wasn't willing to accept." "Right." Reeves was quiet for a moment. "Those vehicles went up there and didn't come back down." "Yes." Which means, yes, another silence. Longer, the kind of silence that contains something heavy. "He's a good officer," Reeves said, and he meant it without reservation. "Graves is a genuinely good officer and an exceptional operator. He's also used to terrain where his read is right. This terrain is different." "I know," Elena said. "If you break off," Reeves started. "I know," she said again. "They'll call it insubordination at minimum. At maximum, I know what it will cost me." She said it without emotion, without drama. She said it the way you say something you've already calculated, fully accepted completely, and moved past. "I know exactly what it will cost me." Reeves looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "How long do you need to reach the Foxtrot 7 position?" 3 hours and 40 minutes if the first section of the north face is accessible from the drainage gully." "It is," Reeves said. "I scouted the drainage gully on the advanced imagery. There's a climbable line from the gully base to the first bench, approximately 400 meters of technical terrain. Then the upper ridge is walkable for about 600 meters before the final vertical section begins. She stared at him. You map the ascent route. I map everything, he said. I've been on 14 operations in Canyon Country. I always map the high ground because high ground is always where the fight actually lives. He paused. The final section, the last 200 meters before Foxtrot 7, that's the part I couldn't fully assess from imagery. It may require direct aid climbing. I've done it, she said, in kit, carrying that rifle. Yes. He looked at her. The calculation behind his eyes was visible in the way he was holding still. 0-200, he said. What? Wait, if you leave at 0-200, he said, and the team moves at 0-300, the gap is 60 minutes. In 60 minutes, Graves will discover you're gone. He'll be, Reeves paused, considering his words carefully, unhappy. That's a diplomatic choice of word. It's the professional choice, Reeves said. He stood. He looked down at her. I can't help you with what you're deciding to do, Vance. I can't go with you and I can't cover for you. Graves will know the moment it happens. I understand. What I can do, Reeves said, is make sure your radio is on the alternate frequency, the one we use when primary comms get degraded. He looked at the sky, in a haboob, which the meteorology team may have underestimated in my personal opinion. Elena looked up at him. In the dark, his face was unreadable, but his posture said everything. Reeves, she said. Get some sleep, Vance, he said. You've got a long climb ahead. He went back inside. She sat in the dark looking northwest where 3,050 meters of rock waited in the breathless pre-dawn silence. And somewhere above it, in the last of the desert night, she could feel the pressure changing. The storm was coming, and she intended to be above it when it arrived. The pressure changed at 0148. Elena felt it before she measured it, a shift in the air that sat against her skin differently than the dry cold of a desert night. Heavier, charged, the kind of atmospheric drop that meteorology teams in air-conditioned trailers with satellite feeds sometimes caught late. She had felt it before. In Kandahar, the pressure had done the same thing approximately 4 hours before the storm hit the valley. 4 hours had been enough time then. She did not know if 4 hours would be enough time now. She picked up the Pelican case. She picked up her pack. She looked at the bunkroom door one final time. Kowalski was still snoring. Webb had rolled onto his side. Torch's boots were still on. Reeves was lying on his cot with his eyes closed. He did not open them. But as Elena moved toward the exterior door, she saw his right hand shift slightly on the mattress, just enough to confirm that he was not sleeping. She went out into the dark. The desert at 0148 was the specific kind of cold that people who had never been to one didn't expect, the cold that dropped fast once the sun left, the cold that made the daytime heat feel like a different country. Elena moved through it without hesitation. Southeast first to clear the compound perimeter, then northwest toward the drainage gully that Reeves had mapped from imagery. She had the topographical overlay memorized, not consulted memorized. Every elevation contour, every drainage line, every ridge line bearing. It lived behind her eyes the way language lives, not as information you retrieve, but as something that has become part of the way you see. She found the drainage gully entrance at 0211. She began to climb. The first section was loose shale over hard substrate, the kind of terrain that looked manageable and was deceptive. Every footfall required a test. And the Pelican case threw her center of gravity 3 inches to the left in a way that demanded constant micro-correction. She compensated without thinking about it, the way a sailor compensates for roll. Her body had learned things her mind no longer needed to supervise. By 0240, she had cleared the shale section and reached the first bench, a narrow horizontal ledge, approximately 2 meters wide where the drainage gully opened onto the face of the north wall. She stopped for 60 seconds, not to rest, to listen. Wind from the northwest, gusting irregularly, pressure still dropping. She kept climbing. At 0310, the radio on the alternate frequency clicked twice. She stopped, pressed the earpiece. Nothing spoke. 2 clicks was not a code they had established, but 2 clicks at 0310 was Reeves. She was certain of it, telling her something. Either the team was awake or Graves had noticed. Either way, the message was, keep moving. She kept moving. At 0327, the first light of dawn, not the sun itself, just the sky's decision to stop being fully black, gave her enough visibility to see the upper ridge line. Foxtrot 7 was above her and to the northwest. The walkable section Reeves had mentioned stretched for approximately 600 meters of moderate terrain between her current position and the final vertical section. She was ahead of schedule, and then her radio came alive for real. Vance, Graves's voice, clipped, controlled. The way he sounded when he was angry in a professional manner that was significantly worse than angry in a human manner. Respond. She pressed the transmit button. Sir, where are you? Ascending the north face, sir. Grid Foxtrot 6, approximately 200 meters below the bench transition. The silence on the channel was exactly 4 seconds long. She counted them. Get back down, Graves said. Now. Sir, I identified. That was not a request specialist. I identified additional evidence of pre-positioned enemy assets on the northern rim, she said. The drone imagery from 48 hours ago shows heavy vehicle tracks on the ridge access road that did not return. Combined with the natural overwatch positions I identified in the briefing, the probability of an organized ambush covering the eastern approach is, I will not discuss operational security on an open channel, Graves said. We're on alternate frequencies, sir. Encrypted. Another silence. 3 seconds. Come down, Vance. Sir, she said, I cannot do that. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was not the silence of a man thinking. It was the silence of a man deciding what category of problem he was dealing with. You understand what you're doing? Graves said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. You understand the consequences? Yes, sir. Then understand this clearly, he said, and his voice dropped to a register that was quiet in the specific way that things are quiet right before they break. If you survive whatever you think you're doing up there, you will face a court-martial board, and I will personally testify to your insubordination. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, she said. I understand. She kept climbing. The radio clicked off. She put one hand above the other on the rock face, tested the hold, shifted her weight, and moved up another meter. Below her, somewhere invisible in the pre-dawn dark SEAL Team Alpha was beginning to move toward the eastern mouth of Devil's Throat Canyon. She climbed faster. At 0412, she hit the final vertical section. Reeves had been right. Imagery hadn't captured the full difficulty. The face was approximately 45 degrees of fractured limestone, the fractures running in the wrong direction, horizontal rather than vertical, which meant her natural hand and footholds were shallow and oriented the wrong way for upward progress. The pelican case was pulling her left shoulder into a position that would cost her accumulating strain through the joint in a way she was tracking and deciding to accept. She found a line. She did not think about court-martials. She did not think about Graves. She did not think about Kowalski's laughter on the tarmac or the way the entire bunk room had arranged itself around her absence. She thought about the limestone in front of her face. She thought about the next hold. She thought about the 42 pounds of precision machinery on her left side that needed to reach 3,050 meters intact and uncompromised. She climbed. At 4:49, she pulled herself over the final lip of the ridge. She lay flat on the limestone for 30 seconds, breathing deliberately, letting her heart rate come down. The wind at this elevation was different, not gusting but sustained, running hard from the northwest, with a quality that felt purposeful, like it was trying to arrive somewhere. She looked northwest. The horizon was wrong. Not dawn wrong. The light to the west was wrong, brown-gray at the base, the sky above it, a deepening copper-orange that meant the haboob was not 18 hours out. The haboob was not 12 hours out. She reached for her radio. Graves, this is Vance. I'm at Foxtrot 7. Static, then copy. Sir, I have visual on the western horizon. The haboob system is significantly ahead of meteorological projection. I estimate 2 to 3 hours to canyon impact, not 18. Silence on the channel. Graves, sir, confirm you copied. I copied, he said. We're already inside the eastern approach. Her stomach tightened. Sir, you need to. We're committed, Vance. What do you have on the northern rim? She was already moving, crawling on her elbows toward the ridge edge, unlatching the pelican case as she moved, pulling the intervention together with hands that had done this specific sequence 1,400 times and no longer required daylight to execute it. Stock, barrel, optic, bipod. She was behind the rifle in 41 seconds. She put her eye to the scope, and the world became very clear and very bad very quickly. The 3 natural overwatch positions she had identified from the topographical map were occupied. Not probably occupied, actively, visibly, currently occupied, and not by 2 or 3 men. The first position held a crew of 4 with what appeared to be a vehicle-mounted machine gun. The second position had a 3-man team with a mortar setup that was already baseplate positioned aimed into the canyon below. The third position, the highest with the longest sight line into the eastern approach, held a single figure with a large optic weapons system. A counter sniper. They had brought a counter sniper to the party, which meant they knew or strongly suspected that the team might have aerial support, which meant the intelligence on this operation had leaked somewhere, somehow, because a counter sniper in an ambush position was not standard defensive preparation for a command node under threat. A counter sniper in a pre-positioned ambush was a signature of something more organized, something that had been expecting visitors. She had less than 5 seconds to decide what to tell Graves and in what order, because the clock on this situation had just changed dramatically. Graves, she said flat and fast, 3 occupied overwatch positions on the northern rim. Position 1-4 personnel, vehicle-mounted weapon grid, Foxtrot 8. Position 2 mortar team already base plate set aimed into your approach, vector grid, Foxtrot 9. Position 3 counter sniper single highest elevation grid, Golf 1. The channel was silent. Graves. I heard you, he said. His voice had changed. Not panicked, career SEALs did not panic. But the quality of his control had shifted in a way that meant he was recalculating everything simultaneously. Kowalski, Webb on me. She heard movement on his end. Boots on stone, equipment rattling. Sir, she said, you're approaching kilometer 3. At your current pace, you enter line of sight from position 1 in approximately 8 minutes. Can you take them? She was already doing range calculations in her head, triangulating from her position to each enemy location, accounting for wind speed drop rate, the altitude differential that would make each shot behave differently than a flat-range solution. Position 2 was the most dangerous. The mortar crew could put rounds on the team before they even knew the ambush had begun. Position 1's vehicle weapon was the most lethal if the team was caught in the open. Position 3, the counter sniper, was the most dangerous to her. I can take them, she said. I need you to keep moving for 90 seconds, then stop at the rock formation at kilometer 2.8. There's a natural reverse slope there that will give you partial defilade from positions 1 and 2. You can see kilometer 2.8 from where you are. I can see everything, sir. A pause that was different from the others. Not professional calculation. Something else. Something that might have been for just a moment an officer hearing something that made him reconsider every decision he had made in the last 18 hours. Copy, Graves said, moving to 2.8. You have 90 seconds, she settled behind the rifle. The wind was running at approximately 22 kilometers per hour from the northwest with gusts pushing 30. At the distances she was shooting, position 2 was at 2,847 meters from her current location position, 1 at 2,623 meters position, 3 at 3,119 meters. Wind was not a factor to account for. Wind at those distances was a decision to make. You did not correct for wind at extreme range the way you corrected at standard ranges. You read it, you modeled it, and then you committed to a solution and trusted your read. She had trusted her read before. She read the wind now. 22 sustained. Gusting pattern approximately every 9 seconds rise to 29 or 30 sustain for 3 to 4 seconds drop back. The gust was running from her left, which meant the bullet traveling downhill and northwest would be pushed right to left relative to the target at consistent intervals. She set the solution. She acquired position 2's mortar operator, the man with his hands on the firing mechanism, the one whose action would send the first round into the canyon and start the killing. She breathed in. She breathed out. She fired. The intervention's report at this altitude was massive. The sound expanded into the open air and dissipated fast, but the physical concussion of it was something that lived in the chest rather than the ears. She was already cycling the bolt, reading the impact through the scope. The mortar position went still. 1. She shifted. Position 1. The vehicle-mounted gunner had heard something. Not her shot, the distances were too great, but perhaps a sound from position 2. He was turning, looking toward the second position. She didn't give him time to complete the thought. She fired. The vehicle gunner dropped. 2. Now, the position one team was reacting, she could see them moving, looking, searching in every direction except the right one because no one fires accurately from 2,600 meters in a sandstorm wind without equipment that announces itself, and she had nothing that announced her. She shifted, found the secondary gunner who was reaching for the vehicle weapon's traverse handle. She fired. 3. And then everything changed. From position 3, the counter sniper, a round hit the limestone approximately 4 feet to her right with a crack that sent rock fragments across her face and hands. He had found her, not precisely 4 feet off at 300 meters, was not a near miss in the professional sense. It was a first-round acquisition estimate, and the next round would be adjusted. She rolled left, 2 body lengths, came up behind a shallow limestone protrusion. The counter sniper was good. He had found her position on the first shot, which meant he had been scanning the ridge since before she fired, which meant he had thermal capability, which meant he could see her even as the light changed and the storm began to swallow the horizon behind her. She had maybe 30 seconds before his adjustment put the next round on her. She had to be somewhere else when that happened. She moved right, hard, 6 body lengths rifle dragging, came up in a new position with the bipod barely stabilized, breathing hard from the sprint crawl, and she put her eye to the scope and found the counter sniper's position, and she did the math in 1 second. That she usually took 10 to do. The counter sniper was moving too. He had read her move. He was repositioning. The wind gusted. She fired during the gust. It was the wrong moment by every standard calculation. You did not fire into a gust peak. You fired in the trough in the sustained baseline in the known quantity. She fired into the gust because she had read the gust, because she had been reading it for 6 minutes and she knew this particular gust pattern, the way you know a person's breathing pattern when you've been listening to it long enough. She knew when it would ease and by how much, and she had built that correction into the shot before the trigger broke. The counter sniper position went still. 4. Below in the canyon, she could hear faintly at the edge of perception the sound of gunfire starting. The ambush had begun without the mortar. Whoever was commanding the enemy force had read the sequence of shots from the ridge, had understood with whatever clarity or confusion that something was wrong on the rim and had initiated anyway. Because initiating without the mortar was bad. But waiting to find out what had happened to the mortar team was worse. "Graves," she said into the radio, "ambush is initiated. How copy static? Broken signal." The storm was closer than she had thought, not just the visible wall to the northwest, but the electromagnetic disruption that preceded a haboob, the charged particle interference that turned military radios into expensive noise generators. She tried again. Graves respond, more static. And then very faintly, through the interference, a voice. Not Graves, Solus the medic. Multiple contacts, northwest quadrant, Graves is breathe. More static. Graves is down, repeat. Graves is... The channel collapsed into white noise. She was on her feet. She put the scope to the canyon below, tracking through the dust that was beginning to swirl even at her elevation, and she found the team, or what she could see of them, and she could see that Graves was not moving in the position where Solus was, and she could see 2 enemy elements moving to flank from the northwest, using the rising dust as cover, and she could see that the team was about to be encircled. She dropped back behind the rifle. She found the lead element of the flanking maneuver, 290 meters closer to her than the position 2 target had been. Easier shot by every technical metric and somehow harder because the target was moving, because the dust was swirling. Now, because her hands knew what Solus's broken transmission had just told her, and her hands did not care about professionalism in this moment. She made them care. She fired. 5. The flanking element's lead man went down, and the element stopped. The pause of men who suddenly don't know which direction the shooting is coming from, which is the most valuable pause in a combat engagement worth more than fire superiority, because it costs the enemy something you cannot replace once it's gone. Costs them certainty. She was already shifting to the second flanking group when the storm wall hit. Not gradually. A haboob does not arrive gradually. It arrives like a decision, 1 moment visibility. The next moment, a wall of suspended sand in static electricity in near zero visibility that swallows everything it touches. It hit her position first, which meant it was moving southeast, which meant it was moving directly into the canyon, directly over the team's position, directly over the remaining enemy positions. For approximately 30 seconds, she could not see anything. She did not move. She could not move. The wind was pushing at 50 kilometers per hour, and building and moving in these conditions without a fixed anchor point was how you fell off a 3,050-meter ridge. She pressed herself flat and held on. And she thought about Graves down in the canyon. She thought about Solis's voice on the broken channel. She thought about Kowalski, who had laughed at her on the tarmac, and Webb and Torch, and Castillo on only his second rotation, and Reeves, who had mapped the drainage gully and said nothing and clicked the radio twice at 03:10 like a man sending a message in the only language available to him. She thought about all of them down there in the zero visibility in the kill box. She had told them was a kill box with the ambush. She had told them was an ambush with no comms and no air support and an enemy force that had prepared this specific trap for this specific moment. She put her hand on the rifle. She could not see through the scope. The lens was coated with suspended particulate, and her visibility was less than 20 meters. But she had the range data. She had the position data. She had spent the last 6 minutes learning where every human being on that ridgeline was positioned, and she knew how they moved, and she knew how they would react to zero visibility, and she knew what a trained ambush force does when their signal contact disappears. They consolidate on their last known position. They move to the predetermined rally point. And she knew where that rally point was because she had watched the Position 1 team look toward a specific feature on the ridgeline twice during the engagement, the involuntary glance of men who have been told where to go if things go wrong. She could not see it, but she did not need to see it. She knew where it was. She knew the range. She knew the wind, which had shifted in the first 30 seconds of the haboob from northwest to almost due west, at higher speed, more consistent, less variable than the pre-storm pattern. Paradoxically, the wind was now more predictable. She set the solution in the dark behind a scope she could not use with hands that were doing mathematics she had done 10,000 times before. She waited. She was waiting for sound, not gunfire. The storm was too loud for gunfire at this distance to carry. She was waiting for the sound of the consolidation, for the sound of men moving on rock in the dark with weapons and fear. At 0541, she heard boots on limestone coming from the northeast. 2 sets, maybe 3. Moving fast, moving together, moving toward the rally point she had already ranged. She fired once into the space they were moving through. She cycled the bolt. She waited. The boots stopped. The storm screamed around her. She waited 18 seconds, and then she fired again into the same azimuth 5 meters closer. The boots did not resume. 6, 7. She lay in the dark in the storm on the 3,050-meter ridge, and she listened to the world with everything she had because in zero visibility, the ears become the eyes, and the ears were telling her something that her tactical mind was processing, and her human mind was trying very hard not to process simultaneously. It was telling her the canyon below was very quiet for a canyon where a firefight had just been interrupted by a sandstorm. Too quiet. She reached for the radio with one hand, the other hand staying on the rifle. "Graves," she said. "Any station, this is Vance. How copy?" "Static." "Ulis," she said. "Reeves, Webb, any station." Static and wind and the sound of suspended sand against limestone that sounded at sufficient volume almost like rain. She pressed her face against the cold stone and waited, because waiting was the only thing she could do right now, and patience was the weapon she had been trained to use more than any other. Somewhere below her, 6 men were in the dark in the storm, and she did not know yet if they were alive. She would not know until the storm gave her something back, a voice, a signal, a sound she could decode. She held the ridge. She held the rifle. She held on. The storm did not relent. It pressed down on the ridge like something alive and deliberate, like weather with intent, and Elena lay flat against the limestone with one hand on the rifle and one hand pressing the earpiece hard against her skull, as if physical pressure could pull signal out of white noise. "Any station. This is Vance. How copy?" Nothing. She had been transmitting every 90 seconds for 11 minutes. She had changed frequencies twice, cycling through the emergency alternates Reeves had mentioned, and each one gave her the same answer. Static interference, the electromagnetic chaos of a full haboob running over military-grade encrypted hardware and winning. At 0552, the wind peaked. She felt it in her whole body, a sustained push that was trying to move her across the rock face by pure force, and she pressed herself lower, spread her weight, made herself part of the ridge. The intervention's bipod was locked. The rifle was going nowhere. But her body was lighter than the rifle, and the storm did not care about her service record. She held on. She thought about Solis's broken transmission. Graves is down, repeat. Graves is, and then nothing. She had been playing those 4 words on a loop since the channel collapsed, turning them over, trying to extract information from their incompleteness. Down could mean a lot of things. Down could mean he had taken cover. Down could mean he had been hit and was mobile. Down could mean Solis was reporting what he feared rather than what he knew. Or it could mean exactly what it sounded like. She did not let herself land on that interpretation, not because she was managing her emotions, but because the interpretation wasn't actionable. What was actionable was what came next. She thought about the remaining enemy positions. She had confirmed 7 kills: the mortar operator, the vehicle gunner, the secondary gunner at position 1, the counter sniper at position 3, and the 2 or possibly 3 consolidating personnel she had engaged blind during the first minutes of the storm. 7 confirmed. The vehicle at position 1 was still operational. She hadn't been able to engage the vehicle itself before the storm hit only the crew. A vehicle-mounted weapon without a crew was hardware. Not a threat, but a vehicle with a radio was a communications node. And if there were survivors from the rim engagement who had reached that vehicle and its radio equipment, the enemy command structure now knew their ambush had been compromised at the highest level, which changed their calculus. An enemy force whose ambush has been partially destroyed and whose overwatch has been neutralized does one of 2 things: it withdraws or it commits. Withdrawal requires the storm to provide cover, which it currently was. Commitment requires sufficient remaining force to believe the original objective, destroying or capturing the SEAL team, was still achievable. She did not know which decision they had made. At 0604, the wind dropped. Not gone, still substantial, still carrying particulate, still degrading visibility to approximately 40 meters. But the peak had passed, and in the relative quiet that followed the wind peak, she heard something. A voice, faint, from below, speaking in a language that was not English. She pressed the earpiece out of her ear and turned her head, using both ears the way you use your eyes when your vision adjusts to dark, not focusing, but receiving, letting the sound arrive without trying to parse it before it fully formed. 2 voices now, maybe 3, coming from the northeast section of the ridgeline, approximately 200 meters from her position. Moving, not consolidating toward the rally point anymore. Moving along the ridge toward her. They had found her firing position, or found enough evidence of it, spent casings in the storm debris, disturbed limestone where the bipod had been the directional pattern of her shots to know that the thing killing their people was on this ridgeline, and they were looking for it. For her. She moved without standing at a combat crawl that was slow and cost her elbows through her kit, but kept her below the profile of the ridge edge where she would have been a silhouette against the lighter sky to the east. She moved south along the ridge, away from the voices, covering 30 meters before stopping to listen again. The voices were closer. They were moving faster than she was. She came up into a crouch behind a limestone outcrop, put her back against it, and thought for exactly 3 seconds about her options. The intervention was not a close-quarters weapon. It was a precision instrument built for distances that most people refused to believe were real, and at 200 meters it was still manageable. But at 20 meters at the distance those voices were approaching, it was a liability. The magazine held 7 rounds, and she had already fired 7. She needed to reload before she could use the rifle at any distance. She reloaded in the dark by feel the way she had practiced it, until feel was the only method that existed. She heard boots on rock close now, very close, and she came around the outcrop low and fast and fired twice in rapid succession, cycling the bolt between shots, and the voices stopped. 8, 9. The silence was sudden and complete in a way that had texture to it, the texture of something finished. She pressed back behind the outcrop. Listened. No other movement from that direction. She checked the time. 6:17. The radio crackled. Not static, not white noise. A sound that had structure to it, compressed interference, degraded but structured. She pressed the earpiece back in and held her breath. Vance! The voice was barely recognizable through the degradation, but she had heard it enough times in the last 18 hours to know it even filtered through a Haboob's electromagnetic fury. Reeves. Reeves, she said. How copy? 3 by 3, he said, which meant barely but functional. We have Graves' wounded shoulder and left side, Solis has him stable. We are at kilometer 2.1, reverse slope pinned. 2 enemy elements, 8 to 10 personnel total, holding the approach from the west and north. We cannot move. She had already turned back to face the canyon and was moving toward the ridge edge to reacquire visual. Copy. How bad is Graves? A pause. Solis says he'll hold, but he cannot move fast. Extraction. Exfil is at the eastern mouth. It might as well be in another country right now. Reeves's voice was doing something careful, staying professional, in the way that professionals do when the situation is very bad and professionalism is the only armor available. We have Castillo with a leg wound non-critical. Torch has eyes on the western element but cannot engage without exposing his position. Kowalski is... A pause that lasted a beat too long. Kowalski took one in the vest. He's up, but he's moving slow. She reached the ridge edge and went prone scope up. The dust was still heavy, but 40-meter visibility was enough to identify movement if the movement was close enough. She swept the canyon floor in her field of view. What's the status of the heavy vehicle at position 1? She asked. Still up there, Reeves said. We can hear the engine. They're using it as a command relay, she said. Yeah, some of them. If they have working comms, they may have called for reinforcement. How long has your extraction window been dark? Since the storm hit, 42 minutes. 42 minutes was enough time to call in additional forces if they had reliable equipment. We know, Reeves Demar said, and the flatness in his voice was not despair. It was the sound of a man who had already done the math and was living with the answer. Reeves, she said, I need you to do something. Go ahead. In 90 seconds, I need Torch to fire 2 rounds north, doesn't matter where, just noise, just to make the western element think the threat is moving. 2 shots 90 seconds from now. A pause. She heard muffled speaking, Reeves passing the instruction. Then copy, 90 seconds. She was already moving along the ridge to the west, heading toward the position 1 vehicle using the visibility window. The storm had partially opened, measuring distance by memory, because her rangefinder was coated in sand, particulate, and non-functional. At 0631, Torch fired twice from the canyon below. She heard the western enemy element react voices, movement the sound of a crew shifting position to face a new threat vector. She fired at the vehicle at position 1, not at the crew, at the vehicle itself, at the fuel system, specifically the external auxiliary fuel tank that certain vehicle configurations mounted on the left rear quarter, which she had seen clearly in the scope during the pre-storm engagement, and which she had noted and filed, and not forgotten, because she never forgot things she had noted and filed. The round hit the tank. The explosion was not immediate. There was a pause of approximately 2 seconds, long enough for her to think she had missed the tank, and then it was not a pause anymore. The fireball was visible from the canyon floor, which she knew because the radio channel exploded with sound. What was that? Kowalski's voice, unmistakable, even degraded loud, was something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite adrenaline, but was the compound of both that combat produced. That was our overwatch, Reeves said. Silence on the channel. Then Kowalski again, quieter. She's still up there. She's been up there, Reeves said. The fireball from the vehicle was providing its own light, now cutting through the suspended dust in a way that the sun itself could not manage, and Elena used it. She used it to sweep the ridgeline to confirm no additional movement toward her position, and then she turned the scope to the canyon floor and used the indirect illumination to find the 2 enemy elements pinning the team. The western element had broken from their position when the vehicle exploded. Not fled, repositioned, moved northeast, trying to use the confusion and the light to swing around the reverse slope where the team was sheltering. It was a tactically sound move. It would have worked against a team without eyes on the high ground. Reeves, she said, western element is swinging northeast. They're going to come around your position from the north side. Tell Torch to prepare to break right on my mark. Copy. She tracked the western element. 4 men moving in a loose wedge using the vehicle fire for backlight rather than silhouette experienced disciplined, not panicking. These were not irregular fighters. These were trained personnel who had prepared this operation carefully and were executing their contingency with professional composure. She respected that and shot the lead man anyway. 10. The wedge broke. 3 remaining, scrambling for cover behind a rock formation she had already ranged at 2,241 meters. Mark, she said into the radio. Torch break right now. She heard movement on the channel, heard Torch's voice say something urgent and profane, heard the sound of boots scrambling on canyon stone. The three remaining Western Element personnel rose from the rock formation to engage what they thought was a team member breaking cover. She fired twice more. 11, 12. The Western Element ceased to exist as a tactical unit. The radio was alive now. Not just Reeves, all of them, multiple voices overlapping, and she heard Sully saying something about Graves, and she heard Kowalski saying her name, not sweetheart, not doll, her actual name. Vance, the way you say a person's name, when you have just revised your entire understanding of who that person is. And she heard Castillo, the young one on his second rotation, say in a voice that was barely holding itself together, "Is she real? Is she actually real?" And Reeves, steady as the rock she was lying on, said, "Yeah, she's real." But she was not listening to the radio anymore because the Northern Element was still active. She had not engaged the Northern Element directly. She had suppressed it by eliminating the Western Element. But suppression was not destruction, and a suppressed force was a force waiting for an opening. She swept north. The Northern Element had done what she expected, used the engagement of the Western Element to move. They were not retreating. They were flanking in the opposite direction, going south, trying to get behind the team's reverse slope from the south side, while the team's attention was on the now collapsed Western threat. It was good thinking. It was the right tactical answer to losing half your force to an unseen shooter on the high ground. Get inside her dead angle. Get under the ridge. Get where she can't see you. Reeves, she said, Northern Element is moving south. They are going to be behind your position in approximately 4 minutes. I cannot engage from this angle. You need to move. Right now, all of you. Graves cannot move fast, Reeves said. He has to, she said. 4 minutes. Move east toward kilometer 2.4. There's a rock channel. It won't be on your map, but you'll see it. It runs perpendicular to the canyon wall. Get into it. It's a natural choke point. Anyone following you has to come through it single file. How do you know about the channel? Reeves said. I've been looking at your canyon for 3 hours, she said. Move, Reeves. A pause of exactly 2 seconds. Moving, he said. Kowalski, get Graves. Webb Castillo on me. She heard the controlled chaos of a 6-person team moving with 2 wounded under time pressure, and she kept the Northern Element in her scope, tracking their movement south, running the geometry of whether they would make contact before the team reached the channel. It was going to be close. The Northern Element was 4 men. Moving fast, disciplined spacing which told her they expected to make contact and were preparing for it. Their point man had a weapon up scanning. The team was moving too, but moving slower than healthy men move the weight of Graves. The cost of Castillo's leg wound, the cumulative toll of 40 minutes of combat in zero visibility, in a haboob in a canyon that should have killed them all an hour ago. At 0644, the Northern Element reached the southern approach to the team's original position and realized the position was empty. There was a pause. She could see them 4 figures in the dust light, reading the ground, understanding that the targets had moved and trying to figure out which direction. She had maybe 30 seconds before they figured it out. She could shoot, she could put a round into the lead man and scatter the element and buy the team another 90 seconds. But she had fired 12 rounds and had 3 remaining in the current magazine, and she did not know what was between her and the canyon yet, and spending ammunition on a suppression when she might need every round for something she couldn't see yet was a decision that required discipline. She made the disciplined decision. She picked up the radio. Reeves, are you in the channel? 30 seconds, he said. You have 30 seconds, she confirmed. She watched the Northern Element's point man make a decision. He turned east. He had read the ground, correctly tracked the team's movement in the disturbed dust and stone of the canyon floor, found the direction. Reeves, they're tracking you. Channel, now. In, Reeves said. We're in. She exhaled something that was not quite relief, because relief implied the situation was over, and the situation was very much not over. But the team was in a choke point. 4 men had to come through single file to reach them. And a choke point with Reeves holding the far end was a different problem for the Northern Element than an open engagement in a sandstorm canyon. She shifted her scope to the channel entrance and waited. At 0648, the Northern Element's point man found the channel entrance and stopped. She watched him hesitate. She watched him look at the channel, narrow, deep stone walls on both sides. The kind of terrain that military training programs used as the textbook example of why you never advance single file into a covered choke point without support. He spoke to the men behind him. She couldn't hear it at this distance and through the storm, but she could read the body language, the gestures, the pointing, the short exchange of men, deciding whether to do the tactically correct thing or the thing their mission demanded of them. They decided on their mission. The point man went in. She watched him disappear into the channel. She watched the second man follow. And then she heard faintly through the storm in the distance, but unmistakably, 2 shots from inside the channel. Then a third, then silence. "Reeves," she said. "2," he said. His voice was completely level. "2 down at the entrance. The other 2 pulled back." "Copy," she said. "Remaining 2 will not come through that channel again. They'll look for another approach, or they'll withdraw." "Copy." A pause. "Vance, what's your status?" "I'm on the ridge. I have 3 rounds remaining and no secondary weapon within comfortable range." Another pause. She heard in the background of Reeves's transmission a voice that was rough and tight with pain, but recognizable. "Graves." "Tell her," Graves said and stopped, and she heard the sound of a man overriding the decision his body was making to stop. "Tell her where is the extraction window." "Eastern mouth," Reeves said to her. "If comms come back online when the storm passes, the extract window opens again. But we need to get to the eastern mouth." "That's 3 kilometers from your current position," she said. "Moving east through the canyon." "Yes." "With 2 wounded." "Yes. And potentially 2 hostile personnel who have not disengaged." "Yes." Reeves's voice did not change. "What do you need to get down here?" She turned and looked back along the ridge. The way down was not the way she had come up the north face in a Haboob's aftermath with degraded visibility and compromised grip from the particulate coating. Every surface was not survivable at the speed she would need to descend. She needed another route. She looked east along the ridgeline. She remembered the topographical data. The eastern end of the north ridge had a saddle, a lower section, where the ridge dropped before connecting to the canyon wall. The saddle was approximately 400 meters from her current position. From the saddle, the descent was steep, but not technical, not vertical, face climbing, but a hard scramble over loose terrain. She could make it, maybe. "I have a descent route," she said. "Eastern saddle. Give me 25 minutes. "We don't have 25 minutes, Reeves said. "The 2 remaining hostiles." "I know," she said. "Do you trust me?" The channel was quiet for 3 seconds. Then Graves's voice again labored, roughened by pain, but carrying the weight of a man who had just spent 40 minutes revising everything he thought he knew about the person he was talking to. "Vance," Graves said. She stopped. "Sir." A pause that had something human in it. Something that was not lieutenant and specialist, but something older and simpler and harder to say. "I made a mistake," he said. She looked out at the canyon where the storm was beginning to thin at the edges, where the light was changing in the way that light changes when the worst of something has passed, and what remains is the aftermath that everyone has to live in. "We can discuss it later, sir," she said. "Stay in the channel. Keep pressure on the western approach. I'll be there." She picked up the intervention and started moving east along the ridge toward the saddle, and she did not look back because looking back was not what this moment required. What it required was 25 minutes in a descent that she had not fully surveyed, and 3 rounds in a magazine and whatever was left in her legs and her hands after 4 hours of climbing and 9 confirmed kills on a 3,050-meter ridge in the middle of a sandstorm. She started to run. The ridge was uneven and the visibility was still 30 meters and the wind was still pushing, but she ran because Graves was bleeding in a rock channel 3 kilometers from extraction, and Castillo was on his 2nd rotation and had never been in anything like this. And Kowalski, who had laughed at her on the tarmac and called her a doll, was moving slow from around in his vest and did not know that the last 2 hostiles were looking for another approach. She ran. The saddle appeared out of the dust at 7:01, and it was steeper than the topographical data had suggested, the way terrain always was when you were actually on it, instead of looking at contour lines on a screen. She looked at the descent. She made the assessment in 2 seconds, steep, loose, manageable at controlled speed, dangerous at running speed, fatal if she lost her footing in the first 100 meters, where the drop was vertical on the eastern edge. She started down. Controlled. Deliberate. Faster than safe and slower than fast. Exactly the speed of a person who had decided what they were willing to risk and was executing that decision without second-guessing it on the way down. At 07:13, her radio came fully alive, not degraded, clear. The storm had passed enough for the signal to stabilize, and suddenly she had Reeves and Webb and Solace on a channel that she could hear completely, and what she heard made her move faster. Western approached 2 personnel moving around the south end of the channel, Webb said. They found another way in. We have 60 seconds before they have line of sight on our position. I'm at the canyon base in 3 minutes, she said. Hold. We can hold for 60 seconds, Reeves said. After that, hold, she said. She was not running down the saddle anymore. She was falling in a controlled way, using the loose terrain as braking material, letting gravity do the work, and using her feet and the rifle butt as corrective tools against the surface rushing up at her. At 07:16, her boots hit the canyon floor. She hit the canyon floor running east toward the rock channel, and she heard the first shot from inside it, Reeves engaging, and then she was at the south end of the channel, and she came around the rock face and she had eyes on the 2 remaining hostiles. They were 15 meters away. She fired. 13. The second one turned and ran, and she cycled the bolt, and at 15 meters with 1 round remaining, she made a decision that was not about ammunition management, but about the thing underneath ammunition management, the thing that was always underneath it, and she let him run. He ran. She did not fire. She stood at the south entrance of the channel with the rifle up and watched him go, and she was breathing hard, and her left shoulder was burning from 4 hours of carrying the intervention on the wrong angle, and her hands were cut from the limestone, and the storm residue made everything taste like mineral dust. From inside the channel, she heard Solis's voice. Clear south. Clear, she said, a long silence. Then footsteps. And Reeves came around the channel bend and stopped when he saw her, and the expression on his face was not surprise Reeves. She suspected it was beyond surprise at this point, but something else. Something quieter and more permanent. 14 hostile contacts, he said. How many of them were you? She lowered the rifle. 13 confirmed, 1 withdrew. Reeves nodded slowly. He looked at her. The cut hands, the shoulders sitting wrong, the kit covered in limestone dust and storm residue, the rifle she was still holding with the comfort of something that had become part of her body on the way up this mountain. Can you walk, he asked. Yes, she said. 3 kilometers east, he said. Graves is mobile with assistance. Castillo can move. We have a 40-minute extraction window that opens when the storm clears. Then let's move, she said. She walked into the channel. Graves was on his feet, supported between Kowalski and Solis. His shoulder was wrapped tight, and his face was the color of something that had been through more than it was designed for, but his eyes were clear. Operational. Present. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything. But Kowalski who had laughed on the tarmac, who had said makeup, who had said sweetheart, who was now holding a wounded lieutenant upright with a bruised chest from a round in his vest. Kowalski looked at Elena Vance, and something moved across his face that was uncomfortable and real, and not the comfortable thing that mockery had been. He started. Later, she said the same words she had said to Graves. Right, he said. Later. They moved east, 3 kilometers to the extraction window. The storm was thinning around them, and above them on the 3,050-meter ridge, the smoke from the burning vehicle was beginning to clear. They moved as one unit, not as a SEAL team with an attached asset, not as 6 operators and the woman they had dismissed on a tarmac 36 hours ago. They moved as something that had been forged in the last 4 hours by conditions that did not ask permission and did not negotiate one unit, one direction, 3 kilometers east to the extraction window that was counting down whether they moved or not. Elena took point. Nobody argued about it. Nobody said anything at all. Reeves fell in behind her left shoulder, watching her 6 o'clock and the northern canyon wall simultaneously. Webb had the radio trying every 30 seconds to raise the extraction team on the other side of the storm corridor. Torch was watching south. Kowalski and Solis had Graves between them, and Castillo was moving under his own power, but favoring the wounded leg in a way that Solis kept tracking with the peripheral attention of a medic who had learned to monitor 3 things at once without appearing to monitor any of them. At 07:19, Webb got through. Extraction, this is Alpha Team. How copies phone static, then breaking through clearly enough to matter. Alpha team, this is extraction. We read you broken but copy. What is your status? 6 personnel, 2 wounded mobile moving east through Devil's Throat toward extraction mouth. Request immediate pickup at Canyon Eastern mouth over. A pause on the extraction channel. Then Alpha team, be advised we have intelligence of additional hostile elements moving to intercept your extraction route. Recommend you hold current position until air support can. Negative, Webb said. We cannot hold. We are moving. E2 Eastern mouth is 35 minutes. You will be there. Another pause. Alpha team, the intelligence on the intercept force indicates. How many, Reeves said. He had moved close enough to speak into the radio without taking it from Webb. Estimated 8 to 12 personnel, vehicle mounted, moving from the south along the Canyon Rim approach road. Lena heard this and did not slow down. She processed it while moving the way she processed everything, not as a disruption to her current action, but as an addition to the calculations she was already running. Vehicle mounted, South Rim, Canyon Rim approach road. She knew that road. She had studied it on the topographical overlay because it was the only vehicle accessible route to the ridgeline positions she had identified as potential enemy overwatch. She had dismissed it as an approach vector for the SEAL team because it was exposed and slow, but as a reinforcement route for an enemy force that knew the SEAL team was trying to extract east. It was direct, it was fast, and it delivered fresh personnel to exactly the right position to cut off the extraction. Someone had called in a relief force. The vehicle at position 1 had gotten a transmission out before she destroyed it. She should have prioritized the vehicle's communication equipment over the fuel tank. She filed that lesson and kept moving. Extraction, Reeves said into the radio. Can you get eyes on the southern rim approach road from your current position? Negative, we are staged 2 kilometers east of the canyon mouth. We do not have line of sight on the rim road. Then you're going to hear us before you see us, Reeves said. Keep this channel open. We're coming. He handed the radio back to Webb and moved back to his position without discussing it further. Elena glanced back at him. He met her eyes for exactly 1 second. In that second, the message exchange between them was complete and required no language. They both understood that 8 to 12 personnel and vehicles on the southern rim was not the same problem as a pre-positioned ambush on the northern ridge. It was a faster, messier, more chaotic problem. And a chaotic problem in a canyon with 2 wounded and finite ammunition was a problem that could go wrong in 100 ways that precision and patience could not fix. She looked forward again, kept moving. At 0724, Graves spoke. He had been quiet since the channel, managing his pain, managing his breathing, letting Kowalski and Solis manage his body. But he spoke now, and his voice was controlled in the specific way that commanders get controlled when they are overriding something significant to stay present. Vance, he said. She did not stop moving, but she angled her head slightly so he knew she was listening. The intel breach, he said. This operation was specific. Timeline approach vector, team composition. An ambush this organized doesn't happen from general threat intelligence. Someone gave them specifics. She had been thinking this since she saw the counter-sniper on the ridge. Yes, sir. Which means someone knew our plan. Yes, sir. The plan was briefed to 6 people plus Carver, Graves said, and you. She heard what was in that sentence. The addition of her name. The specific way he had placed it at the end. She stopped walking, turned around. Graves was looking at her. His face was gray with pain and blood loss, but his eyes had not changed. They were still the eyes of a man who made operational decisions for a living and did not let personal comfort interfere with the analysis. The team had stopped too, all of them in a line behind Graves, and the air had a quality to it that was different from the tension of the last 4 hours. This was a different kind of tension. Sir, Elena said, and her voice was level. If you're asking whether I'm not asking, Graves said. I'm telling you what the investigation will ask when we get back. He held her gaze. I wanted you to know it was coming. She looked at him for 3 seconds. I understand, sir, she said. Good, he said, and something in his expression shifted. Not apology, not yet, but the shadow of it, the shape of a man who knew he owed something and was not yet in a position to pay it. Keep moving. She turned around and kept moving. Behind her, she heard Kowalski say under his breath to no one in particular, That's insane. And Reeves quiet later. Yeah, Kowalski said. Later. At 0731, the canyon changed. The walls narrowed. The floor, which had been relatively flat through the middle section, began to rise in a series of shallow steps, geological layers that had eroded at different rates, creating a terrain of ankle-height drops and irregular footing that was manageable for healthy personnel, inexpensive for a man with a shoulder wound, and another with a leg wound. Elena slowed automatically. Not stopped, slowed, calibrating their pace to what Graves and Castillo could sustain without accumulating the kind of debt that compounded into a fall. Solis moved up beside her. The medic was a large man built for carrying things, and he moved through difficult terrain with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing exactly this, moving wounded personnel through hostile environments long enough that the difficulty had become normal. Graves is losing more than I want him to, Solis said low enough that only she could hear. How much time do we have? She asked. He's stable, but stable is a category, not a guarantee. Solis glanced back at Graves. He needs a surgical facility within 3 hours, not a field kit, an actual facility. She did the math. Extraction in 30 minutes if everything went correctly. Flight time from the canyon mouth to the nearest surgical facility was probably 40 minutes at best. That put Graves at roughly 1 hour and 10 minutes from a surgical table, assuming extraction happened on schedule. Then we don't miss the extraction window, she said. No, Solis said. We don't. He dropped back to Graves. She moved faster. At 0738, Webb grabbed her arm. She stopped instantly, weapon up scanning. Radio, Webb said. Listen. He held the receiver out so she could hear. The extraction channel was carrying something not their extraction team's voice. A different transmission cross-channel bleed that happens sometimes in the electromagnetic aftermath of a haboob when signals bounced unpredictably. Fragmented language shifted, but with one phrase that her ear caught and her mind processed before she consciously decided to process it. The phrase was coordinates, Eastern Canyon mouth, in a language that was not English. The relief force had been given their extraction point. Somehow from the vehicle transmission before she destroyed it, from the surviving hostile who had run from an intelligence network that was better than the operation planners had assumed. The enemy knew exactly where SEAL Team Alpha was trying to exit. They were moving to that point right now. She looked at Reeves. They know the extraction point, she said. Reeves absorbed this without expression. How far out are they? Southern Rim Road, she said. Vehicle mounted, moving fast. They left before the storm cleared. Call it 30 minutes ago. That road runs approximately 12 kilometers to the Eastern Rim access point. At vehicle speed, she calculated, they're already there or almost there. And we have 30 minutes of walking before we reach the mouth, Reeves said. Yes. And 2 wounded who cannot run. Yes. She looked at the canyon walls. She looked at the terrain ahead. She looked at what she had: 3 rounds in the Intervention's current magazine, no secondary, a team of 4 fully operational shooters, 2 more who were limited in whatever Reeves had in his rifle and Webb had on his kit. What's the extraction team's status? She asked Webb. 2 vehicles, 4 personnel, Webb said. Light armed. They're positioned east of the mouth. Tell them to move up, she said. Into the mouth, not to wait outside it. The intel said the intercept force is going to be at the mouth before we are, she said. Tell them to move up into the canyon. If they wait outside, they're exposed to the Rim Road approach from the south. Inside the canyon, the walls give them cover from the south and narrow the engagement front. Webb looked at Reeves. Reeves looked at Elena. Do it, Reeves said. Webb got on the radio. At 0743, the radio came back with the extraction team's response. They were moving. 2 vehicles moving into the canyon mouth, bringing their personnel and firepower to within 1 kilometer of the extraction point's interior position. Elena heard this and made a decision. Reeves, she said, take the team. Keep pace. I need 5 minutes. What are you doing? She was already moving north toward the canyon wall, looking for what she had seen on the topographical overlay, and was now looking for in 3-dimensional reality, the point where the north wall had a climbable feature, a natural pillar formation, approximately 800 meters from the eastern mouth, that rose high enough above the canyon floor to provide a line of sight toward the Rim Road approach. Not 3,050 meters high. Not the ridge. Just high enough. There's a formation, she said, already moving. North wall 800 meters from the mouth. I can see the Rim Road approach from there. If the intercept force is staged at the mouth, I need to see how many and where. You have 3 rounds, Reeves said. I know how many rounds I have, she said. Vance? 5 minutes, she said. Keep moving. I'll catch you. She heard him exhale not in frustration, but in the specific way that someone exhales when they've decided to trust something that still costs them something to trust. 5 minutes, he said. Then we're coming back for you, and the whole situation becomes worse. She was already moving. She found the pillar formation at 0746 and went up it fast. Not the technical climbing of the ridge, but a hard scramble on featured rock, the kind of climbing that was mostly legs and commitment and willingness to move faster than the situation technically permitted. She reached the top at 7:49. She put the scope to her eye, and the situation became significantly worse. The southern rim approach road was visible from this position, a pale line cut against the canyon country running southeast to northwest with the eastern canyon mouth as its terminus. She swept it with the scope. 11 vehicles, not 8 to 12 personnel. 11 vehicles, which at combat loading meant potentially 40 to 60 personnel, and they were not all concentrated at the mouth. They were dispersed along the approach road, some already dismounted personnel moving on foot toward the canyon rim edge, which meant they were not just planning to block the mouth. They were planning to drop people into the canyon from above. They were planning to seal the canyon entirely. She counted what she could see in the time she had. 4 vehicles at the mouth proper dismounting rapidly. 7 vehicles staged on the road, personnel dismounting and moving toward the rim edge at intervals every 100 meters, 2 to 3 people moving to peer down into the canyon where 6 wounded and healthy personnel were walking right now. She got on the radio. Reeves, new information. Go ahead. The intercept force is not 8 to 12. I'm counting 40 to 60 personnel, 11 vehicles. They're not just blocking the mouth, they're deploying to the rim above you. They're going to drop into the canyon at multiple points. Silence on the channel, long enough that she counted 4 seconds. Copy, Reeves said. His voice was completely steady, and she understood in that moment why men followed him, not because he was fearless, but because his voice never gave fear a place to land, never let fear become the dominant signal in the room. What do we do? How far are you from the extraction team's position? She asked. Webb says 700 meters. Run, she said. Graves? Run, Ahan, she said again. All of you. Kowalski carries Graves. Solis takes Castillo. Run. A pause. Then Kowalski's voice tight and immediate. Copy that. I've got him. Graves, I've got you. Sir, we're going to run now. Hold on to me. And she heard Graves make a sound that was not a protest. It was the sound of a man handing over control of his body to someone else, which is one of the hardest things a person like Graves could do, and he did it without argument because the situation had already argued for him. She swept the scope back to the vehicle force. The 4 vehicles at the mouth had finished dismounting. She could see the personnel moving into the canyon entrance on foot, 2 columns using the canyon walls as cover, moving with the disciplined spacing of people who expected to make contact. She had 3 rounds. She chose the 3 targets that mattered most. The first was the team leader of the lead column. She identified him by his radio equipment, and the way the others kept glancing at him, the involuntary orientation of people awaiting instruction. At 1,340 meters, wind, minimal post-storm, relatively straightforward by the standards of her morning. She fired. The lead column stopped. 14. A force that loses its leader in the first second of an engagement does not immediately break, but it hesitates. And hesitation at the entrance of a canyon, while a superior force is coming from behind you, changes the emotional calculus of every person in that column. The math of whether forward is better than back becomes uncertain, and uncertain men slow down. She swung to the second column. Their leader was less obvious. He was not carrying the visible radio. He was more careful than the first man. She picked him based on movement pattern, the way he was directing personnel with small gestures. Rather than words, the economy of a man who had done this before and had learned that unnecessary communication was unnecessary exposure. She fired. The second column did not stop, but it changed. The spacing changed, men instinctively moving closer to the walls, which meant they were slowing down, which was almost as good as stopping. 15. 1 round remaining. She swept to the rim, one figure directly above the point on the canyon floor where Reeves's team was running a spotter. She realized not a shooter, a man with binoculars who was looking down into the canyon and speaking into a radio feeding position, intelligence to the columns below. She fired. The spotter stopped. 16. She came off the formation in 8 seconds, came down the pillar, face faster than she had gone up, hit the canyon floor running east, and she was running with nothing in the intervention because 16 was the number she had gotten to today, and the rifle was now hardware valuable, precise, irreplaceable, hardware but hardware. She ran. At 07:54, she heard vehicles ahead. Not the enemy vehicles. The extraction team, 2 vehicles she could hear before she could see, engines running positioned inside the canyon mouth exactly where she had directed them. And from ahead, the sound of boots and controlled breathing that was Reeves's team running the last 400 meters. She ran faster. She caught them at 300 meters from the extraction vehicles. Caught them because Kowalski carrying Graves was a large man running with another man's weight, and large men carrying weight could only move so fast regardless of will. She came up on his left side without slowing. "Give him to me," she said. Kowalski looked at her 1 second of full disbelief. "You're half his size," Kowalski said. "Give me his right side," she said. "You take his left. We run faster with 2. Kowalski processed this for exactly the time it took them to cover 10 meters, and then he shifted Graves' arm across to her shoulder, and she took the weight, and she did not let herself think about the left shoulder that had been carrying a 42-pound rifle in the wrong orientation for 4 hours, because thinking about it would make it real, and making it real would slow her down. She ran. Graves felt her take the weight and turned his head slightly. His face was very close to hers. "Vance," he said. "Don't talk, sir," she said. "Run." "I can't run," he said, and the small dark humor of it, delivered through gritted teeth with blood soaking through his shoulder wrap, was so entirely unexpected that she almost broke stride. "Then hold on," she said. "I can do that," he said. 200 meters. Behind them, from the direction of the canyon mouth, she could hear the sound of the enemy columns moving again. The hesitation she had bought was exactly that. Bought, not permanent. They were moving. "Webb," she said loud enough to carry without shouting. "Bell extraction to have engines running. We're coming in hot." "They're running," Webb called back. 100 meters. She could see the vehicles now. 2 armored trucks, a door already open on the nearest one, a figure she didn't recognize reaching out from the back. 50 meters. Behind her, the sound of movement from the canyon entrance was close. Too close. Someone, one of the faster personnel from the lead column, had run when the others hesitated, and he had covered ground while she was shooting and running and carrying Graves. She heard Reeves say sharp and immediate, "Webb, left." 2 shots, not hers, Reeves and Webb. The sound behind them stopped. 20 meters. 10. The figure from the extraction vehicle was Carver. She processed this detail peripherally. Carver, the young intelligence officer who had looked at the floor during Graves's briefing when he should have spoken. Carver was reaching out from the vehicle door and grabbing Graves's free arm and pulling, and Elena felt the weight shift as the extraction personnel took Graves the rest of the way. She stopped at the vehicle side. Reeves came in behind her. Then Webb. Torch pushed Castillo into the second vehicle, and Salas went in after him. Kowalski was last walking backward, rifle up, watching the canyon behind them. "Kowalski," she said. He looked at her. His face was running with sweat and dust and the specific exhaustion that the last 2 hours had carved into him. "Get in the vehicle," she said. He got in. She got in last. The door closed. The vehicle moved. For approximately 45 seconds, nobody spoke. The vehicle's engine was the only sound, and the radio was carrying an extraction team chatter, and the canyon walls were moving past the windows, in the way that things move past windows when you were finally moving in the right direction after a very long time of not moving at all. Then Castillo said from the second vehicle she could hear him through the open partition, "Are we out?" "We're out," Soli said. Another silence. Castillo said quietly, the way a 23-year-old says something he does not yet have the full vocabulary for, "I thought we were dead." Nobody corrected him, because nobody had a better answer than the truth, which was that they had been very close to it, in the specific distance between very close to dead and currently alive and moving east in an armored vehicle was a distance that could be measured in decisions and seconds and shots fired from a position that nobody else had been willing to climb to. Graves was between Carver and a medic. She didn't know the medic already cutting away the field dressing to assess the wound properly. Graves had his eyes closed, which was the first time since the channel that he had allowed himself to not be fully present. And the quality of his unconscious face was different from the quality of a man in command. It was just a face now gray and human and tired. The face of a person who had used everything they had and was running on the reserve. Kowalski was across from her. He was looking at his hands. They were shaking slightly post-adrenaline, the body's invoice for everything it had been asked to do in the last 2 hours. He noticed her noticing. He looked up. She looked back at him without expression. "I said some things," he said. "Yes," she said. "On the tarmac," he said. "Yes. He stopped, started again. "I was wrong." She looked at him. She did not say it was fine because it wasn't fine in the sense that it deserved a clean surface and an easy word. But she also did not say it wasn't fine because the man in front of her was not the same man who had stood on that tarmac. That man had been unmade by a canyon in a sandstorm, and what was sitting across from her now was something different, something that had been put back together around an understanding it didn't have before. "Yes," she said, "you were." He held her gaze. He nodded. "Okay," he said, and somehow that was enough. Not closure, nothing in a vehicle moving through a post-storm desert canyon was closure, but acknowledgement, the real kind, the kind that doesn't come with conditions or escape routes. The vehicle reached the canyon mouth. The open desert expanded around them. The vast, flat, bleached landscape that had looked so inhospitable 18 hours ago on approach, and now looked like the most beautiful thing that the surviving members of SEAL Team Alpha had ever seen. Reeves was beside her. He was looking out the window. After a moment without turning his head, he said, 13 confirmed. 13 confirmed, she said. 1 withdrew. 14 total contacts, he said. Yes. In a haboob. Yes. He said nothing else for a moment. Then, the Kandahar file. You climbed something that wasn't supposed to be climbable and hit something that wasn't supposed to be hittable. Yes, she said. What was the distance in Kandahar? She was quiet for 3 seconds. 2,400 meters. He turned and looked at her. Today was 3,050, she said. He looked at her for a long time. She met his eyes without any particular expression because she had not done any of it for the look on his face at this moment or for the look on any of their faces. She had done it because the canyon was a kill box and nobody else was going to climb the ridge, and the men in the vehicles in the channel needed someone above them who could see. That was the whole of it. That was all. Reeves turned back to the window. The desert moved past. And in the front vehicle, Graves's hand moved just slightly, just enough, and found the medic's arm and gripped it once the grip of a man reminding himself he was still here, still alive, still breathing, still owing something he did not yet know how to say. The vehicles drove east. The storm was behind them. Everything else was still ahead. The surgical facility at FOB Kestrel was not a hospital. It was 3 connected prefab rooms with proper lighting, a generator that had never missed a cycle, and a trauma team that had seen enough of what a desert war produced to be unshockable by everything except running out of blood supply. They were not running out today. They had been notified on approach, and when the vehicles came through the gate, the trauma team was already at the door. Graves went in first. Solis gave the handoff report in under 90 seconds. Wound location, estimated blood loss, field interventions time elapsed since injury, and the trauma team took Graves through the interior door without ceremony or pause. The way medical teams move when they are measuring everything in minutes they cannot afford to waste. Castillo went in behind him, walking under his own power, the leg wound assessed as serious but not surgical, which was the specific category of injury that hurt badly enough to be frightening and was not bad enough to require anything beyond cleaning, closing, and time. The rest of them stayed outside. Nobody sat down right away. That was the thing about coming off an operation like the one they had just come off. The body didn't know it was over yet. The adrenaline system had been running on high output for hours, and it did not accept verbal notification that the threat had ended. It needed to see the evidence for itself, needed the quiet to accumulate to a level that registered as real. So they stood outside the surgical facility in the desert morning in kit they hadn't taken off, and they let the quiet accumulate. Kowalski had his hands on his knees. Webb was sitting on the hood of the nearest vehicle. Torch had found a wall to put his back against. Reeves stood with his arms crossed, looking at nothing. Elena sat on the vehicle's running board with the intervention case across her knees. She had not opened it. She was not thinking about the rifle right now. She was thinking about the way Graves's hand had looked when it gripped the medic's arm in the vehicle. The grip of a man who was still here, insisting on still being here. And she was thinking about the surgical facility door and what was happening on the other side of it. At 08:41, Carver came out. He stopped when he saw them all still there. He had clearly expected them to have moved inside, to have dropped kit, to have begun the process of existing in a post-operational state. The fact that they were all standing or sitting within 15 feet of each other in the morning, heat unspeaking, unmoving, told him something that he filed and did not comment on. Graves is in surgery, Carver said. They say the shoulder wound is manageable. The left side is more complicated, fragment. Not around probably mortar debris. They're working on it. Nobody responded immediately. Then Kowalski said, "How long?" They didn't give a timeline, Carver said. They said they'd update when they had something. Kowalski nodded, looked at the ground. Carver shifted his weight. He was holding a tablet, which meant there was administrative reality waiting behind the human reality, and everyone present could see him deciding which one to lead with. "There's going to be a debrief," he said. "Command wants a full operational report by 1400. Given the..." He paused. "Given the nature of the operation and the deviation from the approved plan, JAG will also be present." JAG, Judge Advocate General, the legal arm. Elena heard this and did not move and did not change her expression. Reeves looked at Carver directly. "JAG is coming for the debrief." "Yes," Carver said. "For the operational deviation," Reeves said. "That's what I was told," Carver said. And he had the quality of a man who was delivering a message. He did not fully endorse the quality of someone who knows the message is wrong and is saying it anyway because the alternative is not available to him at his rank. "Fine," Elena said. Everyone looked at her. "It's fine," she said again. "I knew what I was doing when I left at 0200. I told Lieutenant Graves directly that I understood the consequences." She looked at Carver. "I'll be at the debrief." Carver looked at her. There was something in his face, not guilt exactly, but its close relative. The look of a man who knows that the full picture and the official picture are not the same picture and is not sure yet which one is going to be shown in the room. "Your file will be part of the review," he said carefully. "I know," she said. "The Kandahar notation," he said. "It's been command has requested the full file, the unsealed version." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "They didn't know," Carver said. "When they attached you to this operation, the full Kandahar notation was above the classification level of the operational planner who made the assignment. They saw your certification records. They saw your qualifications. They didn't see..." He stopped. "What happened on the ridge," Reeves said. It was not a question. "They didn't see what she actually is," Carver said. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Kowalski lifted his head. Webb stopped looking at the vehicles. Torch's eyes moved from the wall to Elena. She said nothing because there was nothing to say to that would not diminish it. At 09:23, the debrief room was full. It was one of the larger prefab structures on FOB Kestrel, the one with a long table and fixed lighting, and the kind of chairs that were uncomfortable by design because comfortable chairs produce slower thinking in the military's institutional opinion. 4 people from command sat on one side of the table. Carver sat at the end. A JAG officer, a lieutenant colonel named Whitfield, who had the face of a man who had rendered decisions in rooms like this many times and had made peace with the fact that not all of them felt clean, sat beside Carver. Team Alpha sat on the other side, all of them who were ambulatory. Graves was still in surgery. Castillo was in medical observation. The 4 who were present were Reeves, Kowalski, Webb, and Torch. Elena sat at the far end across from Whitfield. The debrief began with the operational timeline. Webb walked through the sequence from 0300 departure to 0820, extraction factual and precise the way SEAL Team after-action reports were built. Times, positions, contact reports. He used no editorial language. He delivered it the way it had happened. When he reached 0201, the point of Elena's departure from the FOB, Whitfield held up his hand. Specialist Vance, he said. At 0201, you departed the forward operating base without authorization and in direct contravention of Lieutenant Graves's explicit instruction. Is that accurate? Yes, sir, she said. Lieutenant Graves gave you a direct order. Yes, sir. He directed me to remain with the team and hold positions security during the approach. And you chose to disregard that order. I chose to act on tactical intelligence that I assessed as mission critical and that I assessed as unaddressed by the approved plan, sir. Whitfield's expression did not change. You assessed, not Lieutenant Graves, not command, you. Yes, sir. Walk me through that assessment. She walked him through it. The Northern Rim Overwatch positions the topographical analysis, the Haboob system, the tire tracks and the drone imagery, the probability calculation on the ambush. She spoke clearly and without defensiveness, because defensiveness implied she was unsure about what she had done, and she was not unsure. She had been sure at 0148 when the pressure changed, and she was sure now. When she finished, Whitfield looked at the command officers on his side of the table. He looked back at her. The approved plan accounted for the possibility of rim overwatch, he said. With speed as the mitigation factor, sir, the plan assumed the Haboob would not impact the approach window. The Haboob impacted the approach window. The meteorological projection said 18 hours. The meteorological projection was wrong, sir. I observed pressure changes at 0148 that indicated the timeline was significantly shorter. I estimated 2 to 3 hours. The storm hit the canyon floor at approximately 0540, which was approximately 4 hours after my observation. My estimate was conservative. One of the command officers, a full colonel named Ostrander, who had not spoken yet, leaned forward. You estimated the Haboob arrival time more accurately than the meteorological team with satellite data and modeled projections. I was physically present in the pressure system, sir. They were in a trailer. Ostrander looked at her for a long moment. His expression was harder to read than Whitfield's, less the face of a procedural officer and more the face of a man who was assembling something in real time. 13 confirmed kills, Ostrander said. From 3,050 meters. In a Haboob. Yes, sir. The counter sniper. You fired during a gust peak. She looked at him. You've read the scope data from the rifle's recording system. We downloaded it this morning, Ostrander said. The ballistic data is... He paused. It's outside normal parameters for that weapon system in those conditions. The gust pattern was consistent enough to model, she said. I had been reading it for 6 minutes before the engagement. 6 minutes, Ostrander said. Yes, sir. The room was quiet. Then Whitfield said, Specialist Vance, the J, AGE, review of your conduct will proceed according to standard procedure. However, he glanced at Ostrander, a glance that carried the weight of something pre-discussed. However, given the operational outcome and the circumstances of the mission, Deviation Command has requested that the review be conducted concurrently with a full assessment of the original operational plan and the intelligence failure that resulted in an inadequately briefed threat environment. Elena absorbed this. The intel breach, sir. The operational intelligence was compromised, Ostrander said. We knew this before you walked into this room. The ambush was not opportunistic. It was specific to your team's timeline approach vector and composition. Someone with access to the operational plan provided that information to the enemy before you moved. She looked at him steadily. I was briefed on the operational plan, sir. Yes, Ostrander said. You were. He held her gaze. Along with Lieutenant Graves, 6 members of SEAL Team Alpha Lieutenant Carver, 2 logistics personnel, and 4 command staff members who processed the operational authorization. He paused. The investigation is not focused on you, specialist. She felt something release in her chest that she had been holding since Graves had said her name in the canyon with that careful addition at the end. And you, she had not let herself respond to it in the vehicle, and she had not let herself respond to it in the hours since, because responding to it before the room had spoken would have been a luxury she could not afford. She allowed herself to respond to it now. Thank you, sir, she said. Don't thank me, Ostrander said. The review is still proceeding. The deviation was real and the process requires it. He looked at the table for a moment. What I can tell you is that the review will have access to the full scope data, the full tactical timeline, as reported by every surviving member of Team Alpha in the unsealed Kandahar file. The Kandahar file. Reeves, 2 seats down from her, did not move. But she saw his eyes shift fractionally, the micro-expression of a man receiving confirmation of something he had suspected. The debrief continued for another hour and 40 minutes. Every engagement, every decision, every radio transmission was walked through in sequence. The 4 team members present corroborated her account at every point, not because they had coordinated their testimony. They had not. There had been no opportunity and no conversation about it, but because the account was accurate, and accurate accounts corroborate themselves. When it was over, Whitfield collected his materials, and Ostrander stood, and the room shifted into the informal state that follows formal proceedings. Kowalski was the first one out. Elena was gathering her own materials, the handwritten range calculations she had made during the debrief's quieter moments. Old habit when Kowalski appeared at her elbow. Not close enough to be confrontational, just close enough to make sure she heard him. Kandahar, he said. She looked at him. What was it? He said. Not the official version. What was it actually? She looked at him for a long time. He held it, did not look away, did not fill the silence with anything easier. He was asking the real question, and he knew it, and he was asking it anyway. A convoy of 12 vehicles, she said. Ours. Hit from a ridgeline at 2,400 meters. The terrain was considered impassable for foot approach. The official response was vehicle suppression and extract. But, Kowalski said, but there were 4 people in the convoy who were going to die if the shooter on the ridgeline kept operating, she said, and the vehicle suppression wasn't reaching him, and I could see a line up the face. So you climbed it? Yes. And you hit him? Yes. From 2,400 meters. Alone, on a face that wasn't supposed to be climbable. Yes. Kowalski was quiet for a full 10 seconds. She watched him process it, not with disbelief, because disbelief was no longer available to him after Devil's Throat, with something that was trying to become understanding and was getting there, but was running into the obstacle of his own previous certainty, the wall of what he had been so sure about on the tarmac 36 hours ago. I said some things, he said, when you got off the aircraft. I remember, she said. I want to, he stopped, ran a hand over his face. The exhaustion was physical, and something else simultaneously, the exhaustion of a person who has discovered that a version of themselves they liked is not the version that was actually operating. I need you to know that I understand what I did. She looked at him. What did you do? I decided you weren't worth taking seriously before you said a word, he said. I decided based on, he stopped again, based on what you looked like before I knew anything about you. Yes, she said. And then I kept deciding it even when you were right about the canyon. Even in the briefing, he exhaled. I kept laughing and I kept dismissing it, and you were right the entire time, and we almost died because the people in that room had the same disease I had. She was quiet. So, he said, I'm sorry, not the easy kind. The kind that means I understand what it cost, and I'm not asking you to make it comfortable for me. She looked at him. She thought about the tarmac, the laughter the word doll delivered like it was a verdict rather than an insult. She thought about the briefing room, the dismissal, the specific quality of being right and being ignored, and having to watch the people ignoring you walk toward the thing you warned them about. She thought about all of it, and then she let it be what it was, something that had happened that was real. That had a cost she had paid and would not pretend she hadn't paid. Okay, she said. He nodded. The nod of a man who understands that okay is not forgiveness and is not absolution and is not a clean surface. It is what is actually available. And what is actually available was enough. At 13:47, Graves came out of surgery. Elena was in the corridor when the trauma team brought him through, transferred to a recovery bed on wheels, and she stepped back against the wall to let them pass. Graves was pale in the specific way that blood loss and anesthesia combined to produce, and his left side was wrapped and his shoulder was immobilized, and he looked like a man who had been taken apart and put back together, which was exactly what had happened. He saw her as they passed. The trauma team did not stop, but Graves turned his head and held her in his sight for as long as the motion of the bed allowed, which was approximately 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, he said nothing. But his eyes said something that she understood completely. Not thank you was too small for what the eyes were saying. Not I was wrong was also too small and too self-focused. What his eyes said was something that didn't have a clean word in English. The thing that people mean when they have seen what another person is made of and the seeing has permanently changed them. She nodded once. He was carried past. At 16:10, Carver found her in the equipment bay where she was cleaning the intervention. He stood in the doorway for a moment watching her work the specific patience of a man who has something to say and is figuring out how to say it. The Kandahar file, he said. I read it this afternoon, after the debrief. She kept working the barrel. And the 4 people in the convoy you saved, Carver said, one of them was a general officer. Yes, she said, that's why it was sealed. Yes, she said, the general wanted it sealed, Carver said. He requested the classification. She looked up. I know. Because if it had been published, if the full account had gone through normal channels, then your record would have... Carver stopped. You would have been promoted, she said, decorated, assigned to a different role. Yes, Carver said. And I didn't want that, she said. Carver stared at her. You agreed to have it sealed. I requested it sealed, she said. She looked back at the barrel. I don't do this for promotion. I don't do this for assignment to a different role. I do this because I'm good at it and because the people I'm doing it for need someone who is good at it. She paused. I liked working in the dark. Nobody expects anything from you when they can't see you. Carver was quiet for a long time. Until they put you on a transport aircraft and send you to a team that decides they already know what you are. Until then, she said. Does it bother you? Carver asked. The way they... It bothered me, she said. She said it in past tense deliberately. On the tarmac, it bothered me. In the briefing room, it bothered me. On the ridge, it didn't bother me anymore. She set the barrel down. You stop thinking about what people think of you when you're 400 meters up a rock face in a sandstorm. The rock doesn't care what they think. The wind doesn't care. The target doesn't care. She looked at Carver directly. I stopped caring about the same time they did. Carver nodded slowly. He looked at the intervention on the equipment table, the length of it, the precision of it, the weight that lived in it, even disassembled. What happens now, he asked. The review proceeds, she said. Whatever the outcome is, it is. And if they restrict your operational status, then I'll deal with that when it happens, she said. And if they don't, she picked up the optic and began cleaning the glass. Then I go back to work. At 18:20, Reeves found her outside. He sat down beside her the way he had sat beside her at 01:30 in the dark before the operation without asking, without preamble, with the directness of a man who had decided some time ago that certain formalities were not worth the time they cost. They sat in silence for a while. The desert evening was doing what desert evenings did, moving fast toward cold, the sky going colors that had no equivalent in places with trees and humidity, and the softening effect of moisture in the air. Out here, the sky went hard colors, oranges that were too saturated, purples that arrived before you expected them. The review board, Reeves said. I submitted my full statement this afternoon. Thank you, she said. I told them exactly what happened, he said, including the drainage gully information and the alternate frequency. She looked at him. That may complicate things for you. I know, he said. I also told them I'd do the same thing again. She was quiet. What I told them was accurate, Reeves said. I observed a competent professional identify a critical tactical error in the approved plan, attempt to correct it through proper channels, be dismissed, and then make the decision to correct it through the only channel still available, which was herself. He paused. That's the most accurate description of what happened. Whatever the board does with it is the board's business. Graves told me there was going to be a court-martial, she said. Graves was in pain and under operational stress, and making a threat he didn't have time to think through, Reeves said. He knows it. The statement he submitted from recovery, Carver told me, he submitted a written statement from recovery 2 hours after surgery, did not include any recommendation for court-martial proceedings. She absorbed this. What did his statement say? Reeves looked at her. He said the deviation was unauthorized and the deviation saved every life on the team. He said in his judgment, those two facts required separate treatment rather than combined adjudication. He said the records should reflect both of them accurately. He paused, and he said the tactical analysis provided by Specialist Vance during the pre-operation briefing was correct in every particular, and that his failure to act on it was a command error for which he accepted full responsibility. The desert went quiet around them, not the threatening quiet of the pre-operation night, a different quality, the quiet of something finished, the quiet of the aftermath of something hard. He's going to be all right, Reeves said. Medically, they said 3 to 4 weeks and he'll be operational again. Good, she said. She meant it completely. Kowalski asked about you, Reeves said, while you were cleaning the rifle. He wanted to know if you were okay. What did you tell him? I told him you were cleaning your rifle and you seemed fine, Reeves said. She almost smiled. That's accurate. I thought so. He was quiet for a moment. You know what's going to happen with the review board? I don't know, she said honestly. I do, he said. They unsealed Kandahar. They have the full scope data from today. They have 6 statements from team members, including the team leader's statement from a recovery bed. They have a Haboob meteorological analysis showing the storm arrived 4 hours early relative to official projection. And they have a ballistic record showing 13 confirmed kills at distances ranging from 1,340 to 3,119 meters in wind conditions that the weapons systems manufacturer would consider prohibitive. He looked at her. What they are going to do is not restrict your operational status. What they are going to do is fight over who gets to have you. She looked at the desert. I liked working in the dark, she said again. But this time it was quieter. More like something she was saying goodbye to than something she was defending. I know, Reeves said, but the dark is over. At 1940, Kowalski knocked on the doorframe of the equipment bay where she had returned to finish reassembling the intervention. Group's getting dinner, he said. Webb found a table that fits 6. Graves is in medical, but Castillo is cleared for the mess. She looked at him. We want you there, he said. He said it simply the way you say something that was once complicated and has been made simple by everything that happened between the complicated and the simple. Not because of what you did today. I mean because of that too. But not only because of that. Because you're part of the team. She looked at him for a moment. I'll be there, she said. She set the rifle down. She walked out of the equipment bay with Kowalski, and they crossed the compound to where Webb and Torch and Reeves and Castillo were already at the table in the mess. And when she sat down, nobody made a joke, and nobody made a speech, and nobody said the word doll or talked about the tarmac. They just had dinner. And that was the thing that stayed with her later. Not the ridge, not the shots, not the storm, not the numbers. What stayed was the table. The way a table with 6 people who had been through something together felt different from a table with 6 people who hadn't. The weight of shared experience pressing down on the ordinary act of eating, making it mean something it wouldn't otherwise mean. Castillo was telling a story about something that had happened in his first rotation, something that was funny now because he was alive to tell it and had not been entirely sure at the time that he would be. Webb was laughing at the right moments. Torch was eating with the focused attention he gave to everything that required his hands. Reeves was listening. Kowalski was being loud and warm in the way that Kowalski was when he was being himself without the armor of performance. Elena sat at the end and listened and ate, and was for the first time since the C-130 had hit the tarmac at FOB Kestrel, exactly as small and exactly as large as she actually was. Not a liability, not an asset, not a doll, not a ghost, not a weapon. A person at a table with the people she had fought beside. 3 weeks later, the review board closed its proceedings. The formal finding was operational deviation under exigent tactical circumstances, with a notation that the deviation was undertaken on accurate intelligence assessment and resulted in preservation of team integrity and mission completion. The notation used specific language that JAG officers used when they wanted the record to be clear without being a celebratory. Specialist Vance's independent assessment of threat conditions was accurate in all material respects, and her autonomous action, while procedurally irregular, was operationally decisive. No court-martial, no restriction of status. The Kandahar file was partially unsealed enough to contextualize the Devil's Throat record, not enough to expose the general officer who had requested the seal in the first place. And 3 days after the board's finding, Elena Vance received a new operational assignment, not as an attached asset to a SEAL team, not as a supplementary sniper support element. The assignment language was different from anything she had received before, and the classification on the assignment document was 2 levels above her previous clearance. She read it once. She put it down. She picked up the intervention case and checked the latches. She was going back to work. Not in the dark this time. But then she never really needed the dark. The dark had just been where they put her because they did not yet know what she was. And what she was did not change based on where they put her. It did not change on a tarmac when a man laughed, and it did not change in a briefing room when a lieutenant refused to listen, and it did not change on a 3,050-meter ridge in a sandstorm with 3 rounds left in the magazine and a team pinned in a canyon below her. What she was had always been exactly what she was. The storm did not make her. The ridge did not make her. The shots did not make her. They only showed what had been there the whole time, waiting the way the mountain waited, solid and permanent and indifferent to whether anyone looked at it, for someone to finally have the eyes to see it. She latched the case. She picked it up. She walked out into the desert morning, and the sun was already burning, and the horizon was clear and flat and impossibly far away. And she walked toward it the way she walked toward everything.